Well, hello there. My name is Carrie Varela, and it's always so wonderful to be joined with Michaela Daystar and Bronwen Logan. And together we make this trifecta, the Reiki Women podcast. And we're excited to talk about an interesting topic today, kind of a geeky, Reiki geeky topic. And it really boils down, as far as my point of view on it, is boils down to the power of words. And we probably all experienced that time where like we got the word we needed to really express or describe a certain um, thing, certain idea that we were trying to communicate. And if you're a writer or just love words, like you're addicted to word porn, you probably think it's really fun to find that right word. I think Michaela even had a word on her Facebook profile recently called like procrastiplanting. Procrastiplanting.
I did.
It's
I
all
did.
about, right, it's springtime here in the United States, and so our happy gardeners are very happy gardening and procrastinating with all of their gardening that they have to do. But nevertheless, the word that we wanted to talk about today is called Reiju. And Reiju is one of the five elements in the system of Reiki. And it's a really important topic. And I think there's a lot to talk about in terms of the word Reiju, what it means, and what Yusui might have meant by utilizing specifically that word as the term he used for initiation to Reiki. So I'd love to hear your thoughts, Bronwen. I'm sure you have a lot to say on this
Yeah,
topic.
I mean, I've got a lot from it. When I was thinking about this subject, my mind was coming at it from a number of different angles. So I'm not sure where to begin, but maybe we should begin with what it is. That's probably a good point. Though I'm sure most people who are watching this actually know. But Reiju is it means spiritual blessing in Japanese, and it is the name of the practice that we use within the system of Reiki, where the teacher sits with a student or stands with a student, whatever. Teacher stands, student sits generally, and they share this energetic space. So it is an energetic support for the student. I always relate it, in its simplest form, to me, it's like hands-on healing, but from once again, a different perspective. So if we're thinking about what do we do when we do a treatment on somebody, yeah, so you're in a space with someone, and as a practitioner, your hands are on or near the body, you move into this energetic space, and the intention is to do a Reiki treatment. So if we switch it over into Reiju, then we have the teacher with the student. So you've got the two sort of people again, and there's no actual necessarily hands-on. There is a ritual involved, and in that sense, also we can see hands-on healing as a ritual. Yep. So this is a different ritual, and it works with the different parts of the body. And the teacher does this ritual around the student, and the intention is also different to hands-on healing. But it is just the concept of how something like that might work. That can help people get their heads around what this process is. So the teacher is with the student, they're in this space, they complete a ritual, and it can be about a number of things, but for me, it's very much about supporting the student in moving into a space that they can, that it's like remembering who you are. Yeah. So it's taking them to something where they go, oh yeah, that's what I'm meant to be doing. That's who I am. That is me. Yeah. This is what it's about. And that remembering is then going to filter through into their daily life, and helping them to move into a space that is, without anger, without worry, with compassion and gratitude, being totally true to who they are. So the more of these Reiju that we sit with, then the more often we are reminded of this space, and it helps bring us back again and again to ourselves. And so ultimately it's helping us to become better people, and more loving, caring individuals. And it's a really amazing, beautiful ritual. But there is historically, I can give a little quick historical zip over that. So it comes from a Mikyo practice, a Buddhist practice, and relates to something called Goshimbo, which means to don armor. And I think when people, so this particular ritual that we're talking about, Reiju, so Mikao Usui would have taken it from there. And the idea of donning armor is, for me, a very beautiful imagery, because I see it as not as a protection, but as a strengthening of the self. So it's like we become this solid, strong, wise being from inside, and that's what we get with practicing Reiju. And helps us to just be more sure of ourselves and our life, and to really tap into what it means to be human, I think. So there's a little bit of a blurb about it, but if I want to take it on a different tangent, and I'll hand this over to someone else, that's how it started in Japan. So then when it went to the West, the name changed because it was a Japanese name. It changed and was originally called an initiation, and that name then morphed into what it's quite commonly known in the West as an attunement. Now, these practices are all slightly different, and within each of those names, they're also slightly different, which is interesting, and yet they all work. It's really about the intention, and I think, Carrie, this is sort of what you were referring to in the beginning, very much about intention, and the purpose of ritual, and so what we're connecting into through that, through the system of Reiki. So yes, there's lots of stuff about attunements which we can talk about. I'd love to hear you guys, your take on where that's at today.
Yeah. I love that we're talking about this today because I'm in the midst of my 12-week Shimpidan class that I teach as part of my year-long program. And this Sunday, we're going to begin working with Reiju and going over much of the material that you just shared and kind of delving into those origins and really, what does this ritual of the Reiju mean for us today? And I love that you identify it as a ritual and this like central ritual within the system of Reiki that really brings our attention to that fortification within ourselves to be and express our full and true self, and to really kind of carve a moment to have an initial experience with ourself, with our true nature in the moment, right? So wherever I am in this moment, as I am stepping into this Reiju, what do I need now to help me be in that mindset of connecting with my true self and being my true self, embodying the precepts in my life? And every time I spiral back to that ritual, it's an initial experience again, because I'm different. The moment is different. The needs that I might have might be different. And, I teach a lot about ritual in a lot of contexts. And, one way to think about ritual is of liminal space. It's a structure for navigating the space between when you're no longer kind of what you were or how you were living your life before, and you're not quite yet what you will become. And there's this liminal space in between that ritual helps us to navigate. And so when we think about our journey with Reiki, we're transitioning from a version of ourself that has been obscured, that's been covered over, that's been distracted by the challenges of life, the distractions of life, the mundanities and the traumas and the pains and the joys and the desires and the attachments of life, has obscured our sense of who and what we truly are. When we step on the path of learning the system of Reiki, we're stepping into a liminal space of transitioning from that self that is not our full and true self, or our understanding of ourself is obscured by all of these things. And we're moving towards remembering our true self. So not changing into something different, but reclaiming and remembering what we've always been. And so, a lot of times I think about these moments in my journey with Reiki as being in this liminal space. And there will be times when I kind of take a pause in that journey, and it's like I'm up on a peak, and I can see the landscape really well, and there's clarity, and I can see up above the clouds, and it's that moment of seeing myself truly for what I am. And then perhaps I go back into the journey, right? Because it really is a lifelong process, until we're enlightened, which is an option. That is a possibility. But there's these moments of glimpsing that self, that enlightened self. And oftentimes my experience of Reiju is like one of those moments of pausing and getting that glimpse of that wide open, unobscured landscape of myself. And hey man, I'm filming a podcast over here. Keep it down. Yeah. Anywho's. Coming back. You can edit that out if you like, or you can just leave the hilarious kid interruption. Up to you. Yeah. So being in Reiju is like that for me. It's like getting up onto that higher vantage point where I can glimpse that wide open landscape, that wide open space. And as part of teaching this material, one of our textbooks for our classes is one of your books, The Japanese Art of Reiki by Bronwen Logan. And you do such a beautiful job in here of giving context for Reiju and really describing what Reiju is, and what it's not, right? So you implied that inside of the Western traditions, we've developed this understanding of Reiju as attunement, as this process that kind of turns on the flow of Reiki inside of a person where it did not exist before. And I wanted to just read a really quick couple of sentences from your book that speaks to that. And, this is one of the kind of central misunderstandings or mistranslations from the original form to the Western form that I really do think, there's a lot of room for a system to change and to evolve and to take on different aspects. But there are things that are essential about a system that if they change, it ceases to be the same system. And I think that this is one of those places. I really challenge and invite Reiki practitioners to consider that there are parts of Western Reiki that have been changed so dramatically from their original form that one could argue that they can't really be called Reiki anymore. And I do feel like this is one of those places. And perhaps we can discuss that in a little bit more depth, but I just wanted to share a couple of sentences here. Reiju does not give students any specific ability. The intention behind this rite is that one gets what one needs for one's personal journey and nothing more. You do not become attuned to any of the levels within the system of Reiki. Ki can be channeled by anyone at any time, and therefore cannot be given or taken away from the student. And I just wanted to kind of put my flag in the sand for that perspective when we're here talking about Reiju.
Yeah, I love your perspectives that you have to share on all of this. And I think I have had a different journey with Reiki and different experiences, but it's my challenge has lately been of unlearning and then relearning new ways of being with Reiki and new ideas or definitions, and getting really deep into those definitions, trying to access them and understand them, and unwinding the the perspectives, the inaccuracies that I may have taken on inadvertently through, and that we all really have taken on, between the cultural differences between Japan and the West, the way Reiki has evolved in the last 100 years. So I think it's really beautiful that, people like Bronwen, like you, and, of course, Michaela as well, but have gone to such depth to really try to understand this stuff, and understand where it comes from, like the history that you shared, Bronwen, with the Mikao and the Goshinpo. All of that has been kind of new to me over the last few years, and it's just really illuminating. It's just really illuminating that this doesn't necessarily just come out of nowhere, right? But
Yeah.
nevertheless, I think it's helpful to kind of put ourselves in the shoes of Yasu and Mikao to the extent that we can, and think about his experiences that led him to this rich discovery of Reiki, his own profound spiritual experiences, and that desire to transmit this knowledge on to a new generation of people, to do it outside of his family, and make it something that was ultimately has been globalized, and that's his legacy, of course. So when I think about him, and I put myself in his position of like, well, how do I go about imparting this energy, this knowledge, this awareness to somebody else? And I think that's where the words are so important. And I know for myself, when I've tried to impart something of a spiritual nature to my students, and if the word is a little off, or it just doesn't quite describe what I'm trying to express, it bothers me, frustrates me. But there's this beauty when it does align, and the word really, really, really speaks to the essence of what I'm trying to communicate. And so I just have to assume that Reiju was that right word, that Yasui used, that he was really trying to transmit to his students, about this. This is how how we transmit Reiki to each other, how it transcends the boundaries between you and me, and it becomes part of us. So when I think about spiritual blessing, to me, that's just entering and walking into the energy of the precepts. So when I can work my way through anger, and work my way through liberating myself from fear, and being grateful for the wonderful things that I have in a day, and sit inside of myself and be true to whatever it is that I'm struggling with, dealing with, and then also taking time to be compassionate to myself and others. And when I can hold that space, to me, that's this richness of Reiju. And when I can be in that place where, I often ask my students and my clients, my Reiki clients, is like, how much of our life and how much of our consciousness is trapped up in worry and anger? And I think it's a lot of that, so I mean, I can speak for myself, it is a lot for me. I think about and I worry a lot. I get angry a lot, and I have to shift myself out of that way of being quite a bit. And so to me, to hold that space of Reiju is to hold that space of compassion for myself if I am struggling with worry or fear. But really beyond that is to know who I am beyond the worry and the anger. Is to understand myself, that I'm not those emotions, I'm not those feelings, I'm not whatever drama I'm trapped up in, and connecting me deeply to myself from the inside out. And I also do really love the word attunement. And for me, as a Western Reiki practitioner for over 10 years, I mean, that was the word I used. And that's the only word that I really had to describe initiation. And I think of attunement as something of like tuning in, of dialing in, of being really in alignment with oneself, with the universe. And then from that, this shower, this rain of Reiki that can flow through one. And I've always thought of the attunement as like a really beautiful, sacred, spiritual ceremony. one of the things that inspired me to move away from Western Reiki was that people were even starting to change the word attunement and the process and the ritual of attunement away from things, and using words like placements, which to me didn't make any sense, because my understanding of Reiki is that we are already enlightened. That we don't need more to become the fullness of who we are. We already are that. And so, and that is a slippery slope, I think, when you're starting to think about just, you know, in my spiritual life, and like the first things that drew me towards spirituality was, if I'm honest, was to become more, was to be better, to get out of my own way, to become who I wanted to be. And to me, that felt like a lot of consuming and like trying to add on attributes towards myself, to become a bigger person. And that's also something I've had to unlearn, that, I don't have to become anything more to be the essence of who I am. I don't have to get another degree. I don't have to have another certification. I am already what I am, and I'm doing what I'm meant to do. And so I think that there is a slippery slope there. There is a tendency, maybe it's subconscious, is to get in spiritual circles, is to think about the work of spirituality or self-development as becoming something that you're not, or growing into those spaces. And we're all living and growing, and that's a huge part of our psychology. We all need to learn and grow as beings. So of course that's important, but I think what you were saying, Michaela, is really important, is to know that there's always those goals that we're reaching towards, but the task of Reiju is to get out of all of that, because really that's about ego, and the essence of Reiju is something beyond that. And I agree with what you were saying as well, Bronwen, that it is our work as facilitators, if you're doing this kind of work with students, is to hold the space and to guide the student into that space. It's not an easy task, but it is a task that as a teacher, you don't have to do it for your students either, that they have to be willing to step into that space. And when they're willing to step into that space, the magic of Reiki is absolutely there.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Yeah, I love that. I was just thinking about what you were saying about, being angry and all those sorts of things. And I guess, we can talk about the precepts, don't be angry, whatever. And it's like, yeah, okay, don't be angry. But, everyone's question is, how, right? Because it just seems to be, it is insidious. I mean, it's passed on. It's everyone's, one is angry, the other one responds angry. This is our world. And, within the system of Reiki, we talk about don't be angry. And, we talk about tools for that. When we experience Reiju, we experience a space that has no anger, no worry. And that is an enormous lesson. Yeah. So if we're looking for ways to not be angry, to not worry, to know within ourselves moments of pure clarity and peace, then that is like a touchstone that we can always pull back to ourselves. And we can say, well, how do I not be angry? Well, the more that we experience that space, the more that we can fall back, and because I know that space now. Oh, I remember that space. Yes. Oh, I'm remembering it again. And the more we have that, the more we can sit back into that and know what that feels like. When we're living in a society that is frantic and we don't have moments of peace and quiet and that beauty of Reiju, then we find it very difficult to step back into that space, because we've forgotten what on earth it feels like not to feel like that, not to be on edge, not to be having to deal with all of the things that are coming at us all the time. So yeah, that's really a beautiful way of dealing with anger and worry. Absolutely. I thought that was lovely. I'm not sure we transmit, but I once again, it's words, isn't it? And when I teach that, you can, I tell people about the attunement process, and I tell people about Reiju. And then we look at the different processes. And you know what? They are different. They're different in the way that we think. So we're coming at them from different perspectives. And for me personally, I don't do the attunement process because I don't think in that way. Yeah. And look, there's lots of reasons why people will do the attunement process. And it's, I have no actual judgment about that. But all I'm saying is that I think that there are different ways of thinking. And the attunement process is about the teacher putting something into a student. And, because of the actual ritual, that's what the ritual does. Yeah. It's almost impossible to see it in another way. And the ritual of the Reiju is not that. We're not putting anything into anyone. So those two different angles, I think, represent a lot of how a lot of the differences between a Western perspective on the system of Reiki and a Japanese perspective. And for me, I'm much more interested in the Japanese because of the holistic concept of not actually doing something to someone or making anyone anything. And those things are not a part of my practice. So yeah, I think we can see quite a difference there, and that's quite interesting how that's shifted and changed. And actually, who was just saying there about how things have changed. I read a comment the other day online of someone saying, "Oh, I've done like I don't know Reiki 1, but I'm opening up my Reiki business now, and I'm I don't need to do any more." And and it is that thing where people become so disconnected from what it actually means to practice a system that they and a lot of people going, "Go girl, yeah, you do it," and it's like, do what are you doing? I don't know what you're doing, and it is this lack of understanding of what it means. I feel like what it means to practice a system of Reiki. And I'm sounding arrogant there, sorry about that, but I mean, it's just like any practice, you have to learn the practice. I mean, you can't just make it up, right? I don't know.
Well, and I feels like, again, back to the importance of words. I love that we kind of have that framing concept in this conversation because, emphasizing the system of Reiki versus Reiki,
Yeah.
right? I mean, we've talked before about the importance of that languaging to distinguish the phenomenon of Reiki, spiritual energy, which is what we are, that animates and binds us, versus a system of practice that people engage in, right? Those are two different things. They both use the word Reiki. But here we see another distinction of an importance of using that phrasing of a system of Reiki, because it really gives us a mindset and a framework that this is a system. It's multiple pieces that come together to achieve a particular aim. And what that aim is, and what we understand that aim to be, it makes all the difference in terms of how we are practicing, right? And so if the system that we're orienting towards is about receiving something that we didn't have before, becoming something that we weren't before, becoming special in a way that we weren't before, and only being able to achieve that through the passing on of somebody who is in a position of authority because they themselves have received it. There's this narrowing down of what's actually possible spiritually for us as humans. There's this kind of emphasis on specialness and on separateness and distinctness between people who have it and people who don't, people who have been attuned and people who haven't. Now, I'm not, the mindset shift there is that we already have it. We already are it. We don't need anybody else to give it to us. There's nothing special about being in Reiki. It is who and what we are. However, it requires our own personal responsibility and diligence to be in a system of practice. You know, again, back to the importance of using that phrasing. You know, I've had people ask me, like, why do you always say it that way? This practicing the system of Reiki. Isn't it easier just to say Reiki? Yes, it's easier, but it's much less specific. And it doesn't continuously hone my attention and my mindset towards my responsibility to practice and to practice a complete system that I understand in depth. And, you know, it's inside of what I just said, you know, I'll just fully acknowledge that there is some personal opinions and judgments about a personal choice to move away from a system that emphasizes those elements of specialness and separateness. That's part of what started to not feel right to me. And moving into a system that says that we have an inherent birthright as living beings, as humans, and we have a responsibility to diligently work towards accessing that birthright, something that we already have, and that we're in a process of remembering that. It's something that we used to understand, perhaps when we were tiny, right? Maybe it's been all the way back from when we were a tiny baby that we remembered this, that we knew this truth. We're remembering it, we're reaccessing it. And in that context, you know, Carrie, there was something that you said that felt like a reframing of the word attunement that actually really resonated with me. I don't know that whether or not you intended this, but it stuck with me. And that was when you said it's about tuning in to ourselves, to listening, right? And tuning into something is different than receiving something you didn't have before, right? Because if we're attuning into it, if we're listening to it, it's already there. It's there. We've just maybe not been paying attention to it. And that to me is what Reiju is. And it's what, in fact, the whole system of Reiki is about that tuning in and listening to something that has been whispering to us all along. And that listening and deep listening within ourselves and then amongst each other is an essential aspect of not only practicing the system of Reiki, but other systems that aim to bring us to similar places. And so I think it's valid to choose a different type of system and a different set of mindsets. For some people, it works much better conceptually, or it feels more safe. It feels more soothing to be inside of a system where the mindset is that we can choose to take on something and be given something that we didn't have before. And that there's empowerment in that. And if that's the right mindset for you or for anybody, that's great. We should practice the system that works for us. But what I'm always advocating for, and sometimes get a little soapboxy and sometimes cause waves in different spaces, but that's okay. I'm okay with being a bit of an interrupter in that way. But let's be clear about what it is specifically we're practicing and where it came from. And for me, the word Reiki, again, back to words and the importance of understanding the words we use, means something specific, came from somewhere specific, came out of a very specific cultural and historical context. And if we change essential aspects of what that word means, then we're talking about something else. We're not talking about Reiki anymore, right? And so, you know, there's a part of me that wants to just advocate that, like, a lot of these Western systems, they need to be renamed. They're not Reiki. They're not practicing the system of Reiki. There's something else. They are a different mindset altogether. It's a different way of understanding what is actually happening inside of the practice, and a very different way of understanding what spiritual energy is and how we relate to it. And so, you know, I'm on the campaign of, like, let's find some really juicy, beautiful names for these systems that might be more accurate to what they are. I don't expect that will actually take off, but I'm just going to go ahead and say it here publicly on the internet anyway.
You could call them
off my soapbox.
You could call them not Reiki. Hey, how about
Not Reiki. I am practicing the system of not Reiki.
Yeah, look, I just want to say about what you were saying there, Michaela, that my concern is that when it's all about being attuned, and that there is an abuse of power that takes place, right? And I think that's what you're intimating, but not quite saying. And there is an abuse of power that often takes place, and I have seen it over the years. And I thought that it has dissipated. It has dissipated, but it's still there, and it's this thing about the teacher having the power over the student, the teacher making some decisions for the student. Yeah. And I don't think we have that right. It's not, that's my beef with all of that. And as I said, it just comes from a totally different angle and understanding of Reiju, yeah, but also further out of the system of Reiki and how it's practiced. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's a lot to say about these. I think we're getting really into the meat of this conversation, and I love it. Just responding a little bit back to what Michaela said, and I think it's really important to practice non-judgment, and that, the essence of Reiki, no matter how we name it, and it is alive in everybody and anybody who practices Reiki. That's just really my firm belief. And that's my experience, because I could easily say I've been that one of those people who's like, nope, you can only get Reiki after being attuned. But that was the rhetoric that I learned, and I understood. But then there's the experience of Reiki.
My question to you, Carrie, I have a question. So did you find a truth in that? This is my thing, right? Like, yeah, someone tells you something and it might be rhetoric, but did you find, I mean, we've all come from Western background with the system of Reiki, right? But did you find a truth in that?
Well, okay, so that's a good question. And so for me, the truth is that the universal energy, the spiritual energy of Reiki, and I'm going to date myself a little bit for our younger listeners, but if you've ever had an AM FM radio, yeah, and you're like dialing in and dialing to this certain channel, or you used to listen to like the heavy metal station, or the hip hop station, or whatever it is, you have to like go and then it's just, you get all this weird static, and then you land on a channel, right? And maybe you like that music, maybe you don't. But that's kind of like our consciousness, right? Is that some days we're in the heavy metal and it's just like, rah, that's what we're listening to. Or when we're in a state of worry, we're just dialed in to that emotion and we're almost emotionally hooked in. And to me, the process of learning Reiki is about learning how to dial in to the frequency of Reiki, how to really tap into what is my essence and what is that voice speaking to me? Because I have a lot of voices in my head. I have a lot of voices about worry or shame or this or that, or other people's voices also of what I should be doing, or and so to me, the attunement was like, let's dial in. And that's the space that I would hold for my students. So I don't think it was about gaining anything. It was about finding this essence. Maybe I use different language, but to me that resonates, that works. And, I agree. And then, I really did struggle with other ways in which it was language, like the whole idea of placements. To me, that doesn't resonate. That seems very wrong, in fact. And even now that I understand Reiki, it's this whole idea of having a higher vibration of Reiki, or a better Reiki, or if you really understand Reiki, like universal energy, spiritual energy, like there's no real topping that. It is the top of the top. And you can't really double it and make it better. But that's an ego mindset, that drive to continuously improve something without really understanding what it is that you have in the first place, or tinker with something. without understanding what you have. So, you know, there was definitely a lot of things that didn't feel like it was an integrity, but I also felt this beautiful energy of Reiki. I felt the essence of Reiki. I felt it guide me. I felt and I could experience how beneficial it was for me. And many points in my practice in life, I just felt like that's what I was in touch with. That was my teacher. It wasn't really the words in the book. It was what felt true to me. And so I think that's important, but you know, that also leads us to an over reliance on intuition. Well, like, you know, you can't just use your intuition to deduct the truth of anything. Like we should have a better awareness of what is really Reiki, and, you know, what might not be exactly within the context of Reiki, or you know, we can't use our intuition to understand the history of Reiki. I mean, that's facts. So we should use facts for that point. So.
I think, look, I really like what you just said at the beginning of all of that when I asked you that question, which was, you know, about the AM/FM radio, because what it seems to me is like, I do not have the answers to the universe in any sense, right? So, and all I can know at this point in my time is what I know, right? And with the best intention of the best practice that I can think of that I know. So that's all I can know. And that was sort of what you were saying, I think. And I think that's a really good answer, actually, because I think we all do stuff. I mean, you know, whatever I'm doing right now is not in the fullness, actually, of possibly who I am, but it is to the fullness of who I can be at this moment. Yeah.
And I think it's really important that you mention the power over dynamic, because I think that is so relevant. It's so relevant when you're starting to use words like I'm a Reiki master, and, you know, students then taking on and adopting that language and saying, oh, but my Reiki master told me. And there's so much hierarchy in those words. And those are one of the reasons why I omit the word master from my practice and teaching of Reiki. But I did describe it the other day to my students, and they really enjoyed this. And it comes from this book, Eat, Pray, Love, by Elizabeth Gilbert. If you read it, such a good book. But she talks about the spiritual journey and what is a spiritual teacher doing anyways. And she talks, and I forget what exactly she used this word, this kind of obscure word for it, but she described what it's like to be at the edge of a forest, and like the teacher, the guru, the, you know, whoever is transmitting any sort of spiritual knowledge to you is like in the forest, and they come back to the edge of the forest and they try to tell you what it's like inside of the forest. And maybe your path isn't to be like they are, to go all the way into the forest. Maybe your path is to be on the outskirts of the forest, but you want to understand it still, you know. And so I think that's a little bit of what maybe having a right relationship between teacher and student is saying, you know what, I've lived this, and this is my perspective, and I'm going to come and meet you where you are and share what I think is relevant to you. It's not about telling you what to do with your life, but it's about the perspective that the forest has taught me that I can share to you. And in the midst of our busy lives, you know, that might be the only little bit of the forest that student gets to take with them, you know, in their daily life. But that little bit is going to help them and support them.
I think when I was talking about people doing, like teachers doing, I was talking about specifically with the attunement is, you know, the idea, for example, of putting symbols into people. You know, it's this idea of now you have access to this. Yeah. Whereas that's not how the Reiju works. And I think that, you know, this idea of I'm giving you this thing. Yeah. And in reality, I don't think we're really giving anything in that sense, that it is that it is the you know, we come to it. I think you said it, Carrie, before, you know, it's the intention of the student as much as it is the intention of the teacher. You know, we need these things.
Well, and both of you are really speaking to something that I've been thinking about quite a bit this month. I've been doing a 21-day practice with Sanmitsu and, you know, working on practices of the body, the breath, and the mind. And, you know, really that the system of Reiki is designed to help us to train our mind to focus on the truth of ourself. And that all of these systems of practice and all of these words that we would use to describe the experience and everything that the teacher would tell to the student who's on the edge of the forest and hasn't been in the forest yet, these are all constructs of our mind. These are all thoughts and ideas that we have. And, you know, the thoughts that we have, the ideas that we have, the way that we understand what we're perceiving, which is functions of the mind, absolutely dictates how we then proceed and behave and think about things and how we feel, right? And therefore how our physiology operates, because how we feel has a lot to do with what's happening in our body, right? And so, you know, in a large sense, it's like, what mindset do we want to choose? Like, I say this to my students, I can't say with 100% certainty that the way that I understand Reiki as a phenomenon in the world and the way that we relate to Reiki and whether or not it is what we are or not, or whether we have it or we don't, or we need to be given or not, I can't say that my beliefs about that are 100% true and factual and accurate. There's absolutely no way that I can prove to you that what I believe about the system of Reiki is fact. What I have is my direct experience and my choices with how I'm going to understand what I'm experiencing. And the way that I listen to people who have walked that path before me and how they describe what they have experienced and who are further along on that journey. And I've done that, you know, with regard to the system of Reiki. And I've listened very carefully to, you know, a range of different paths that we could call practicing Reiki. And I've made choices about what teaching and what perspective and mindset makes sense to me. You know, like when you asked, well, did it resonate with you? Did it feel like it was true? You know, there's teachings that I've followed for 5-6 years that ultimately I had to just get honest with myself and say, this just doesn't feel true. It just doesn't feel true. It doesn't feel aligned with my understanding and my experiences and my values. And so I'm going to have to step into a different way system and start over. You know, I completely started over with my Reiki practice. And so, you know, I just want to put that out there is like, we follow the systems that feel like truth to us or that we've been told are true, right? So, you know, there's lots of different ways that we make decisions about how we're going to operate. And sometimes that comes from outside of ourselves. Sometimes it's compelled by other people. Sometimes it comes from within ourselves. And you know, what I would just invite us all into and really urge us into is an honest self-assessment about what feels true. And if a particular system, honestly, in the depths of a person's experience and being feels like this is the mindset that works for me, then that's what they should follow, right? And not to belabor the point, but with an acknowledgement that inside of a certain cultural and historic perspective, there's a different mindset that has been followed, a different way, you know, a different worldview that has been followed, and that we make choices about where we're going to be and how we're going to be with that. And then when we take on the role of a teacher, right, how we share that. You know, Carrie used the word transmission earlier. And while I agree that, you know, from my point of view within Reiki itself, spiritual energy isn't transmitted from person to person. It's already present, but information and knowledge and, you know, directions on how to practice a certain way of relating to our Reiki can be transmitted through teaching. And that's, you know, what we take on as a teacher is someone who, you know, is a bearer of information and who passes that along. You know, we really have to take that next level of care and self-responsibility with how we talk about this work and how we pass it on and what mindset we're passing on to our students and to what degree we are limiting their own ability to choose the mindset that they want to follow, and to what degree we're allowing for spaciousness in that. And it so often comes back to the principles of firm and flexible, right? Like giving enough structure and stability and foundation that a person can feel rooted and strong in their practice, and allowing for flexibility for people to make choices inside of that.
Yeah. You're on mute.
Well, it feels like this is a really rich source of discussion, and as much as we'd love to probably chat on further, it's we're at time here, so we would love to hear from you, listeners. What are your thoughts around the words of Reiju, attunements, initiation? What has been your experience in this realm as a teacher of Reiki, perhaps, or a student of Reiki? And we'd love to hear what resonates most with you. What really feels true in your heart of hearts as your experience of Reiki, how it has been to study Reiki from a teacher, and whether or not you're receiving it or sparking something, some truth inside you that you've always known. So please share with us your thoughts on the topic. We'd love to hear more, and maybe we'll chat more about Reiju and these concepts that came up today in future episodes. So,
and don't forget, I was just going to remind us about next week. Michaela, over to you.
Yes, this coming Sunday or Monday, if you are in Australia, will be our very first practitioner circle, Embodying Reiki with Reiki Women podcasts. We have a couple of folks signed up, and we are so looking forward to being with you, following practices that are inspired by these conversations on the podcast. So we'll leave links to register for that, to join us for that. We'll be holding those monthly on the first Sunday of every month.
Beautiful.
Yay. Well, so join us for the first one. The first one's always so potent, so powerful. I know you'll get so much out of it. I can't wait for it this weekend. So thank you all so much for listening, and we'll talk to you again soon. Bye.